a time that I used something that I learned at LEC. Actually, right now, in my master's program, I'm learning about psychopathology, and diagnosing people. So I think back to my abnormal psych class where we really looked into different disorders and mental illnesses. And now as I learn to diagnose and use the DSM, I look back on that and I'm like, oh yeah, that rings a bell. Oh yeah, and it's nice to not be learning all of this crazy stuff new, because there's a lot of information coming at me all at once. So it's nice to think back and be like, oh yeah, I remember that. And then also, there's a lot of stuff that you learn in a liberal arts education that's not necessarily from the classroom. So whether that means like learning to deal with other people, learning with how to deal with adversity or situations that aren't pleasant. I think and learning how to listen to others' opinions and things like that. I would say I use those things and not necessarily only the stuff I learned in the classroom. I use all that other stuff every day. Whereas, I mean, I'm still gaining education from what I learned before, if that makes sense.
The one thing, like, I could retweet a lot of the things that Summer said from the psych program, but to some, what my experience is that our psych program is awesome. Dr. Collada and Dr. Buchanan, and at my time, Dr. Eisenberg, really did a great job of shoving knowledge into our heads. And when I got to my master's program, I took 3 years off, and I walk into my master's program, and they're covering things that we covered in my classes at Lake Erie College. And other people are like, I've never learned this before. And I'm just like, you never learned this before? I learned this in my undergrad degree. And so I felt really proud of my education from Lake Erie College in those moments, because like I was like, wow, like I'm ahead of the game here. I feel like I'm gonna stop there and say ahead of the game. To that end, also working in your the motto at Lake Erie College when I was there was get in, stand out. And I did just that. I was kind of like a shy kid in high school, and I came into Lake Erie College with like ready to go. By sophomore year, I was chair of Student Activities Council, and I was just working on my networking skills, getting to know people, and working on my organization. Doing theater, which is, in some ways very similar to a sports schedule. You got to be there every night, and you got to make sure that you're balancing all of these things. And time management is the key to all of that. You got to find the time to do all of these things, making sure that you're giving the rest for yourself, taking care of your mental health, and doing everything to keep your grades as good as you can.
And for myself, once again, my undergrad was in business administration and sport management. My MBA I finished in 2013. I'm an associate vice president, investment officer for Wells Fargo Advisors. We work with private client, high net worth individuals, families, and small business owners. I would say what I've taken from the Lake Erie classes that I've taken, that I took, was actually entrepreneurship. Even though it says on my business card that I work for Wells Fargo, the practice that I run is pretty much your own small business. We don't have a salary. We pay for all of our marketing expenses. We pay for our assistants. So being able to go through college and work on business plans and work on marketing plans, competitive advantages and disadvantages, things of that nature, more of a holistic approach that a business owner will take, that was very beneficial when I got into this role.
Okay, I have biology degree, graduated in 2016. currently I am an intervention tutor for Pymatuning Valley Middle School. I think the biggest thing I took from Lake Erie wasn't necessarily from a specific class, but was from the overall climate and the way faculty and staff interacted with students. In my experience, like I always felt very much like you're an individual person. We care about you as a person. You're not just another name on the list of names we have to get through. And that's something I definitely try to keep in mind and mimic in my career working with students. To remember that they're individuals, they have lives, they are people and deserve to be treated as such, which again was always the way I felt at Lake Erie.
Thank you all for sharing that. I'm glad you had that experience, Ellen. That makes me happy. That's what we try to do. We are getting a few questions from different instructors, so I did want to bring our attention to that really quick. So the Section C class wanted to know if you could think back on your first year of college, what was your biggest adjustment while you were here? So transitioning back from high school into your first year, what was that adjustment like? And could you maybe again shed some wisdom on our new students?
I would say for me, it was probably gaining a lot of freedom. An 8 a.m. English class was pretty easy to sleep in instead. So making that adjustment and holding yourself more responsible, that was definitely something that took a little bit getting used to. That was probably my number one thing.
Yes, that's always very challenging.
For me, it was living away from home. So I'm originally from Florida. I had visited Lake Erie, an impromptu, very quick visit with my stepmom when I was in the 8th grade because this is her alma mater as well. And other than that, I had never been here. I had never set foot on campus. So moving from Florida all the way to Ohio, I have family about an hour and a half away, but still being alone, not knowing anyone. I had never met my roommate before I moved in. So it was just a very large adjustment. Living with someone that I didn't know, not having any friends. It really took me out of my comfort zone and made me become my own person. And I think a lot of that happened during my freshman year.
So, go ahead, Joe.
I would say autonomy. The autonomy that we have really manifested in my freshman year. And it comes in good ways and bad ways. Like, you're in control of your own life and you kind of got to figure out things on your own. Yeah, faculty members are going to be helpful with you, but you got to think for yourself. And that's the goal of going to a liberal arts education, is to find that autonomy and find how your neurons work inside of your brain and how you make sense of things. And I think that was something that was really important for me to just really, like Summer said, become your own person.
So my adjustment was a little bit different because I was actually homeschooled K through 12. So starting freshman year at Lake Erie was my first experience with classes in an actual classroom. So that was probably the biggest adjustment for me. I commuted though, so I wasn't living on campus, but classes in a classroom and all the school clubs and activities you got to do. So
you had a really easy adjustment with what's going on now with the virtual classrooms and everything.
Mostly.
Yeah.
Mostly. The tech's a little different now though.
True. Very true. Very good point. We have a really great question from another instructor. He mentioned that all of you seem very highly motivated, which you all certainly do. You did a lot while you were here and you've done a lot since you've graduated. What gets each of you going when there's so much going on? As I was just mentioning, there's homeschooling situations. students are in this, virtual environment even more than they've ever been before. How do you fight that overwhelmed feeling?
Bringing in my therapist perspective, something that I've learned over the years of working through stress and getting overwhelmed is that when we are stressed and we're overwhelmed, our gut reaction is to shut down, shut people out, and not do the things that we like to do. And so the what is now clear to me, the quickest way to get through it is to do the opposite of all those things. Push your comfort zones. If I feel myself shutting down and being less social, I'll go through my phone and I'll text all of my friends that I haven't talked to in a while. I will force myself to go out, or force myself to read a book if I'm like feeling like my brain needs some help. But we know what we like, and when we get overwhelmed, we stop doing the things. Don't do that. Continue to do the things that you like, even when you're overwhelmed.
I would agree with that. I also something, and it's funny because I feel like I'm bringing in my master's degree as well. But when I start to feel overwhelmed, this sounds very therapist-y of me. I like to sit in that feeling and think, okay, I'm overwhelmed. Why am I overwhelmed? And then I usually make a list of everything that I have going on, and I then take it one at a time. And I think these are all manageable bits and pieces. They say, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You can do all these things, but you have to kind of sector them into their own pieces so that it doesn't all seem like, sometimes you can't look at the big picture. Sometimes looking at the big picture will cause you to be overwhelmed. So then you just take it back to that, I'm just going to get through today. I'm going to do what I need to do today. And if you need to break it down even smaller, I'm going to do what I need to do this hour so that I don't get so overwhelmed that I begin to shut down. And if I do end up getting that overwhelmed feeling, I like to try to catch myself in it and say, it's okay. I do have a lot going on, but I got to get back on the wagon. And I got to do all of these things, and that I will be able to do them.
I like what you said there. Well, two things. One, when you're trying to get things done throughout the day and breaking things down piece by piece, that's a great way of getting through tasks that might be overwhelming for you. But at the same time, I actually look at it in another light when I am feeling overwhelmed. And for a perfect example is working with my clients during this time with the stock market going as haywire as ahead, with COVID, everything going through. We always have the conversation is, what is the big picture? What are our long-term goals? And is this something that is temporary? Does this alter our long-term outlook and view? And then a good example is if you ever get seasick, they say if you look at the waves right in front of you, it's going to make it worse. But if you look at the horizon, it looks level, it looks flat, you're less likely to get seasick. So if you have a constant view of what is your long-term goals, some of the overwhelming factors that are happening day to day might not be as significant as you think they are when you're in the moment.
So my why, as far as when I don't feel like getting up in the morning, because is obviously it's the kids. That is the reason I want to get up. And sometimes I'm like, I don't want to go, but then it's, well, I know that whatever student I need to work with that day needs me to show up. But it is overwhelming. As much as I love my job, it does cause a decent amount of stress. So some ways that I handle that is I actually journal specifically about work. Because working in education, I can't necessarily share the stories that happened with other people because of privacy, but I can journal it for my own purposes. And then I also run. So last night I ran 5 miles. So that tells you what a Tuesday after the long weekend looks like.